All right, so get ready, because we're going to dive into this electric unicycle thing.
Okay.
People seem really into them.
Yeah.
You sent over this super interesting chat between some serious EUC writers.
Yeah. Yeah. They're really into it.
They're comparing all the top models, talking about suspension or no suspension,
Right.
and even sharing some pretty wild riding stories.
Yeah. And some cautionary tales, too.
I know. So, like, how do they balance this passion they have with, like, the reality that these things can be dangerous?
Well, I think that's what's so interesting.
Yeah.
Is how much they balance the thrill of it all with, like you said, the caution.
Right.
You know, they talk about pushing limits, but they also talk about the risks.
Yeah.
And they're very serious about emphasizing that EUCs are not toys.
No.
Like, you really have to respect the power of these machines.
Yeah, one writer even compared it to his motorcycle crash, going like 129 miles per hour.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and that's what really struck me.
Yeah.
It's like they've seen firsthand how dangerous this can be.
Absolutely.
And that's why they're so big on safety gear.
Yeah, they mention helmets, wrist guards, knee pads.
All of it, yeah.
All that good stuff. So before you even think about hopping on one of these things,
Gear up.
Gear up.
Yeah.
Now, what about picking the right wheel?
Oh, that's huge.
They made it sound just as important as having the right gear.
It's kind of like you wouldn't take a monster truck to a go-kart track.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
It's about matching the wheel to your style, the environment.
So how do you even choose? There are so many options out there.
Right. There are a ton.
They were talking about Tesla T3s, the InMotion V12, V13, the Sherman Kingsong S22.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. It seems like the Tesla T3 is a good all-rounder.
Yeah.
A lot of them seem to like that one, especially for city riding.
Oh, interesting. What makes it good for the city?
It's supposed to be super portable and easy to maneuver in traffic.
That makes sense.
Yeah, one guy even mentioned taking it on public transportation.
Oh, wow. I never even considered that.
Right. So portability is key.
Definitely.
But then you have something like the InMotion V13 powerful wheel. But one writer said it overheats in hot weather.
Really?
Yeah, like to the point where it won't even charge until it cools down.
That would be so frustrating.
Right. Especially for a higher-end model.
Yeah.
Shows even the popular ones have their quirks.
Yeah, it definitely highlights how important it is to hear from people who've actually ridden these things.
Absolutely. Real-world feedback is invaluable. Speaking of which, did you notice how much debate there was about suspension?
Oh, yeah. To suspend or not to suspend. Right?
Exactly. What's the deal with that?
Well, it's kind of this classic divide, you know?
Okay.
Some riders love that raw, connected feeling of non-suspension, but others swear by the comfort and stability of suspension.
Yeah, it's kind of like choosing between a mountain bike and a road bike. Depends what you're looking for.
Exactly. And it even affects how the wheels handle. Like, one writer mentioned that suspension can be a bit weird in corners, especially at higher speeds.
Well, when you're leaning into a turn on a suspension wheel, it compresses, and then when you come out of the turn, it rebounds. So it creates this different feel.
So it's not just about comfort, it actually changes the mechanics of the ride.
Exactly. And, you know, that's just scratching the surface. They get into all sorts of details, tire pressure, power pads, even how they stand on the wheels. They're like fine-tuning every aspect of it.
They're like EUC mechanics.
Right. It's amazing.
Tinkering with their rides, just like gearheads with their cars. I love that.
They even debate about the best ways to accelerate. Some like a centered weight distribution, while others prefer a more aggressive toe-down approach. Wild, right?
That's so cool, but it also kind of emphasizes how much of a learning curve there is.
Well, for sure.
You can read all the forums, watch all the YouTube videos you want, but ultimately, you got to get out there and figure out what works for you.
Exactly. And that's where having a community like this is so valuable.
Yeah.
They've already gone through the trial and error, the crashes, all of it.
Right.
They're sharing that knowledge so others don't have to learn the hard way.
Okay, so speaking of learning the hard way, they were talking about this thing called a cutout.
Oh, yeah. Cutouts are no joke.
And it sounded kind of terrifying.
It basically happens when you push the wheel beyond its limits and it just cuts out.
So what causes that?
Well, they said it can happen during hard braking, going downhill on a full battery.
Wait, downhill with a full battery?
I know, it sounds weird, right?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
But it's because of regenerative braking. When you're coasting downhill, the wheel tries to regenerate energy.
Right.
But if the battery's already full...
It's like, where do I put this?
Exactly. And that can overload the system and cause it to cut out.
Oh, wow, I had no idea. So you really have to be mindful of your battery levels in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually brings up another interesting thing they talked about, firmware updates.
Yeah, like the updates we get on our phones and stuff.
Exactly. EUCs rely on software too, and just like any software, it needs updates.
But they seemed really hesitant about doing those updates.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've all been there, right? You hit that update button and hope for the best.
Oh, totally. Sometimes it feels like a game of Russian roulette with your electronics.
And with an EUC, the stakes are even higher because it's your safety on the line, literally.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what's the solution? Just never update.
Well, it's about finding that balance. They stress the importance of doing your research before updating. Reading reviews, see what other writers are saying, that kind of thing.
So it's about being informed and cautious, not just blindly trusting the latest update.
Exactly. Sometimes it's better to stick with what works, especially when a software glitch could send you flying.
It's like you're constantly fine-tuning.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're so detail-oriented. Like, they were talking about how tire pressure, different power pad setups,
Oh, yeah.
even the way you stand on the wheel can all impact performance.
It's like they're saying, yeah, the tech is amazing, but you got to know how to use it.
Exactly. And it really highlights that this isn't just a toy. It's a machine that demands respect and understanding.
Totally. Speaking of understanding, I got to ask about those cutouts again. Especially that whole downhill full battery thing.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling at first, right?
It really is. Like, you'd think going downhill would be when you're least likely to have a problem.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But they explain it so well. It's all about regenerative braking. You know, when you're coasting downhill, the wheel tries to put that energy back into the battery.
Right. Makes sense.
But if the battery's already full...
They, like, overflow.
Exactly. And that sudden surge can overwhelm the system, causing a temporary power loss.
So it's not just about being a good writer, it's about understanding those nuances of the technology.
Absolutely. And speaking of technology, remember those firmware updates we were talking about?
Oh, yeah. They seemed kind of wary of those.
And for good reason.
Mm.
It's not like updating your phone. A buggy firmware update on an EUC, that's a recipe for disaster.
Especially at speed. They were talking about a firmware issue that caused the pedals to dip unexpectedly.
Ugh, yeah, the dreaded pedal dip.
Yeah.
That's enough to make anyone think twice about hitting that update button.
No kidding. So what's the takeaway there? Just avoid updates altogether.
Not necessarily. It's about being cautious and informed. Do your research. See what other writers are saying. Maybe wait a bit and see if any issues pop up.
Okay, so err on the side of caution. Got it. But let's lighten things up a bit. I loved hearing them talk about the social side of EUC writing.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely more than just a solo activity.
They were talking about group rides, competitions, even just that little nod of acknowledgement you give another EUC rider when you pass on the street.
Exactly. It's like this unspoken bond. Like, hey, you get it. You understand the joy, the freedom, maybe even the slight terror of riding this thing.
Right. There's a shared experience there.
Definitely. And they said the community is incredibly welcoming to newcomers, always happy to share tips, advice, even just the stoke of riding.
I love that. It's cool how something like this can bring people together.
Totally. And, you know, it's not just about the social aspect. They also talk about how EUC riding has changed them on a personal level.
How so? Like, change their perspective.
Yeah. They talked about feeling more connected to their surroundings, more aware, more present, that sense of freedom, that wind in your hair exhilaration. It seems to seep into other areas of their lives.
It's like it unlocks something.
Probably. And reminds you that life's an adventure, you know.
I love that. So, okay, we can't talk about all this freedom and exhilaration without addressing the elephant in the room. We got to talk safety gear.
Right. And they did not hold back on that. They were adamant about helmets, wrist guards, knee pads, all of it.
And they had the stories to back it up.
Oh, yeah. Close calls, crashes, you name it. They stressed that those pieces of gear aren't just for show. They can literally save your life.
One writer even had this saying, dress for the slide, not the ride.
I like that. Catchy and accurate. Because you never know what's going to happen out there.
Exactly. But even with all the gear in the world, you still need the skills to back it up. They were really big on practicing those emergency maneuvers. Heartbreaking quick turns.
Oh, and those speed wobbles.
Yeah, what's the deal with those? I've heard they're terrifying.
They sound like it. Basically, the wheel starts oscillating back and forth really quickly.
Like shaking uncontrollably.
Yeah. And if you don't know how to handle it, it can throw you off completely.
So how do you handle it?
They said the key is to stay calm and keep your knees bent, kind of subtly shifting your weight to counteract the wobble. But the most important thing, practice.
At low speeds, I'm guessing?
Exactly. Build up that muscle memory so if or when it happens at higher speeds, You're ready.
Okay, so preparation is key. Got it. Now, on a lighter note, let's talk about where this is all going. They had some fascinating ideas about the future of EUCs.
Oh, yeah. They weren't afraid to dream big. Like, imagine dedicated EUC lanes right alongside cars and bikes.
That would be amazing. Zipping through traffic, no more road rage.
Right. And they were thinking even bigger. Like, what if charging stations were as commonplace as coffee shops? You could just pop in, grab a latte, and juice up your EUC.
That's the future I want to live in.
Right. But they also acknowledge that with increased popularity comes new challenges.
Like what?
Well, for starters, how do you integrate EUCs into existing infrastructure? How do you ensure safety for both riders and pedestrians?
Yeah.
How do you prevent EUC-only traffic jams?
Okay, yeah, those are some big questions.
Definitely. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration between riders, manufacturers, city planners, everyone to figure it out.
It's kind of exciting, though, right? Being part of something new and figuring it out as we go.
Totally. And they were pumped about the tech advancements, too. Even longer battery life, lighter materials.
Oh, yeah, they're geeking out about carbon fiber frames and stuff.
It's like they see this technology as a blank canvas, and they're just getting started.
So much potential. Okay, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's circle back to something you brought up earlier. The idea of an EUC driver's permit.
Yes. The million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I'm still a little torn on that one.
Me too. It's tricky, right? On the one hand, you want people to be safe and responsible. And a permit could help with that.
Right. It could weed out people who aren't taking it seriously, who haven't learned the basics of safe riding.
But on the other hand, I also believe in personal freedom. And I worry that too much regulation could stifle innovation and discourage people from trying something new and exciting.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between safety and freedom. And it's a conversation that's just beginning.
For sure. And it's a conversation that'll probably get more complex as EUCs become more popular.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I have to ask, what surprised you the most about this whole EUC discussion so far?
Honestly, it's the sense of community. I knew people were into EUCs, but I had no idea how passionate and welcoming the community was.
They're definitely a dedicated bunch.
They are, and they're clearly onto something special. It's not just about the tech, it's about the freedom, the adventure, the connections you make along the way.
Well said. It sounds like we're both feeling pretty inspired after hearing their insights.
Definitely inspired. Now, I'm really curious to dive into their predictions for the future of EUC design. Like, what are these things going to look like in 5-10 years?
Oh, they had some wild ideas. Get ready for some next-level EUC fantasies. Oh, they had some wild ideas about the future of EUC design. Like, remember how we were talking about longer battery life? They weren't messing around.
Yeah, hundreds of miles on a single charge. Can you imagine?
It'd be a whole new world for EUCs. Cross-country road trips, anyone.
Sign me up. But it's not just about going farther, is it?
Definitely not. They were also really excited about lighter and more durable materials.
Oh, right. Carbon fiber, those crazy composites.
Exactly. Imagine EUCs that are even more portable, able to withstand anything you throw at them.
That would be a game changer for off-roading and stuff, right?
Absolutely. And they think these advancements will make EUCs appeal to a much wider audience, not just the techies and daredevils.
Makes sense. The easier they are to use and the more they can do, the more people will be into them.
Exactly. Oh, and of course, they couldn't resist speculating about the control systems of the future.
Right, because the tech can always get even cooler.
Always. They were talking about EUCs that are so responsive, so intuitive, it's like they're reading your mind.
It's like that whole man-machine interface thing from sci-fi movies, but for real this time.
Totally. But instead of jacking into some virtual reality, you're just gliding effortlessly through the real world.
I like the sound of that. Now, we talked a bit about the social side of EUC writing earlier. Anything else from that part of the conversation stand out to you?
You know, I was struck by how much they emphasized the sense of community. They talked about group rides, online forums, even just that little nod of recognition when you pass another EUC rider on the street. It's like a secret society.
I love that image, this whole underground network of EUC enthusiasts connecting and sharing their passion.
Exactly. And they were very clear about how welcoming everyone is, especially newcomers.
That's awesome. It sounds like they're really building something special.
They are. Okay, so before we wrap this up, the EUC driver's permit. Last chance, any final thoughts?
Honestly, I'm still conflicted. Part of me loves the idea of everyone being properly trained and licensed before they hop on one of these things.
Right. It would definitely make things safer.
But then the other part of me worries about overregulation? Like, are we going to take all the fun out of it if we're too strict?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
How do you strike that balance between safety and freedom? It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
For sure. Especially as EUCs become more mainstream. It's a conversation that's just getting started.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation we need to have. Riders, manufacturers, city planners,
Mm,
everyone needs to be involved in figuring out how to make this work.
well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the wild world of electric unicycles, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the sheer passion and excitement surrounding this technology. These riders are onto something truly special. They're not just riding EUCs, they're pioneering a whole new way of moving through the world.
That's a great way to put it. It's been an inspiring conversation, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe we'll all be zipping around on EUCs in the near future.
Maybe. But until then, if you happen to see an EUC rider out in the wild, give them a wave. You never know. They might just be the future of transportation.
Here, here.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of electric unicycles. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.
Happy riding, everyone.